Good afternoon, everybody. It is October 21st. This is Uncle AJ, and you're watching the channel, my channel, The View from Serendipity. Today, episode 5, we're going to talk about computers. And I'm saying part 1 because this is probably going to be 3 to 4 part series. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart. If you watch my first episode, episode 1 about hobbies, computers was in there because it did start out as a hobby 42 years ago. And 4 years later, it became my career. And I recently retired 10 days ago, so computers are going back to becoming my hobby. They never stopped being my hobby, but they were my calling. They were my I'm one of those crazy people that love to go to work because I get to work with the greatest and latest machines and software. And that we'll get into in the later parts, the difference between computers and software. And essentially, think of a computer as a car that's sitting in your driveway, but it doesn't do anything until you, the driver, get into it and you take it somewhere. That's you or the software. So a computer by itself can't do anything until the software comes along to make it do things. Cars like a computer, you are like software. You make it do things. You do errands, tasks, you go places. So think of it like that. But we'll get more into difference between hardware and software in a later episode. For now, just think of it. Computer is basically a computing device. The abacus, which, interesting enough, I was researching, I always thought was invented in China. It was invented in Sumeria, approximately 2700 BC. I would put it about 4,700 years ago. That's a long time ago. That's Sumeria, one of the earliest civilizations in Macedonia, predated Babylon by quite a few hundred years. So if you're into archaeology and ancient history, look them up. Cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia. Current day Iraq, between the region of the two rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris. So very interesting stuff. Jump forward, basically like a computer's computing device. Abacus, first known computing device. 1946, a bunch of research scientists developed the ENIAC, which was the first true modern computer. It was more of a tabulating device, and it used vacuum tubes. We jump forward again, and in 1953, IBM created the 650. This was the first commercially viable computer that could be programmed to do certain things. I'm going to sort of like take another jump. I want to go through this quickly because this is background historical stuff. Number system started with Roman numerals about 400 to 500 BC. But Roman numerals are very bad for doing arithmetic. I mean, MCMLXX, what the hell does that even mean? I have to look it up. You know, why is the Super Bowls in Roman numerals? Anyway, a few hundred years later, the Arabic numeral system, which is what we call it today, originated in India, probably between the 1st and 4th century. This is a base 10 system. Get it? Base 10. You have 10 fingers. More than likely, it's because traders and merchants used base 10 finger counting to do their transactions. In the 9th century, Arab mathematicians started using this for what we know as modern arithmetic, and which then went beyond with the English and the Germans going into more advanced calculus and whatnot. But that's a whole nother subject. 1947, predating the first IBM 650, Bell Labs in New Jersey, scientists developed a transistor. Transistor is basically a switch. It's a solid state switch that has an open position and a closed position. That look familiar? You'll see a lot of devices that have O and I on it. So when you hear about modern processors and they say 1 million transistors on it, and look it up, this is what they're talking about. They're saying they're solid state now. It's basically when you go the Intel prefab plant or AMD prefab plant, they basically take silicon wafers and they use lasers to basically create solid state transistors, which either open or close. And that's all they do, is they're either open or they're closed, which leads us to 0 ones, binary digits, or what we call bits. 0 1, that's a bit. 8 bits equals a byte. That's ASCII, okay? With a byte you have 8 positions where you can have a 0 1, and it's basically 2 to the 8th power if you want to get into the math of it. So that's how many combinations you can have, which I think comes out to 256 or something like that. But as an aside note, we only really use 7 bits because the 8th bit is really a parity bit. Go look into it. It has to do with the fact that when data is processed, that it's used as a sort of like a checksum number. We're going to jump forward. Computers consist of CPUs, central processing units. They consist of memory, which you know as RAM. They consist of storage, which can be solid state storage, a hard drive, or a floppy disk, like my first computer. Which was a Commodore 64 that I taught myself to program on in my early 20s, I couldn't save the programs. Once you turned the Commodore 64 off, you lost everything. So about 6 months later, I bought a cassette recorder. Anybody here knows cassette? Anyway, I was able to save my programs on the cassette recorder. So, and unfortunately, one cold winter morning when I was living up in the Northeast, static electric jumped from my hands into the Commodore 64, fried it. That was my introductory computer. I taught myself BASIC. I went to Crown Books up in my lovely home state of Maryland, bought a couple of books, one on BASIC and one on creating games in BASIC. And I taught myself how to program. And that was in my early 20s. I'm now 66 and a half, just retired as I told you. But 6 months later, I went out and bought an IBM PC Junior. Piece of crap computer, but came with a lot of good documentation and 2 very important volumes of books. One was MS-DOS 2.10, Microsoft Disk Operating System 2.10, the first true operating system that was stable and worked very well. The second book it came with, the big binder, was GW Basic, which is a more advanced version, Microsoft's more advanced version of standard BASIC. And I already knew BASIC from working on my Commodore 64, so that was a great sort of like start getting into real PCs. And of course, PC Junior came around as a cheaper version of the PC because the PC was still quite expensive. Apple was around, also available, but Apple was also very expensive. Anyway, so next jump we're going to make, because we're going to go through this real fast, part 1, because we're going to go to more in depth later. There are basically 3 types of operating systems. Operating system is a low-level software product that allows the computer to basically operate, okay? On mainframes, which I started my career in mainframes with a phone company up in the Northeast, it was MBS, which later became OS 3.9. This is on the big iron machines, IBM's big mainframes sitting in those data centers with these chilling towers that were as big as a mid-sized bungalow. That was the dominant operating system back in the 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. And then along came, in the late 70s, came Unix. If you have one of these, whether it's an Android or a Apple, this is not a phone. This is a high-speed computer that's connected to the internet, okay? The operating system of Android is based on Linux. Linux is a variant of Unix. If you have an Apple, your Apple, whatever they call it, is also based off of Unix. It's a variant of Unix. And so this is it. This Unix is very popular whether you know it or not. It's in your pocket. If you have a phone, it's in your pocket. The third and most prevalent operating system that came along in 1995, and this was a huge jump because remember I told you about disk operating system? Well, disk operating system was functional but clunky. Windows 95 came out and it revolutionized everything because it gave you a beautiful graphical interface. You could drag and drop stuff, copy and paste stuff, and you know the rest, right? Windows. So you got basically three major operating systems. There's everything else is based on variants of these. But yeah, we'll talk more about this later. Probably episode 2, I'm going to talk about hardware and software and how one is dependent on the other, etc., etc. And then we'll get more into application level software versus operating system software, and then we'll get into the internet and so on. Those are for the next few parts. Anyway, hope this was a nice primer for you. If you're interested in getting into computers, like you want a career in it, do yourself a favor, take an aptitude test. I did. When I was working at the phone company, my hobby was already computers. They had an aptitude test. I took it downtown Washington, D.C. It was a 4-hour battery of tests for math, logic, etc., etc. Passed it, waited for 2 years, got into the phone company's computer training program called Programmer's Basic Training. 3.5 months of horrible, grueling, stressful courses because you had to pass one course to advance to the next. And if you failed one course, you were washed out. You went back to whatever you were doing, whether it was, key punching, service rep, etc., etc. I passed on the last day of the course, 3.5 months. Very stressful, but it immunizes you forever against work stress. That's what it did. But do yourself a favor. If you want to do this as a career, take an aptitude test. If you don't have an aptitude for computers and you go into computers, you're going to struggle with it. If you have an aptitude for it, it'll come to you very naturally. And for those of you who just want to understand computers, we're starting here. We're going to have probably 3 more parts to this. So hopefully you learned something. Hopefully I passed on some good information. And hopefully you'll keep coming back to this channel. And I don't get paid for this. I'm doing this because I want to share my knowledge after 6.5 years. So have a great day. We'll see you soon. And bye-bye.